Hello. The paper that I am going to be giving, Teaching with Che, Place-Based Learning as Revolutionary Practice, is the work of me and a colleague, Dr. Sandra Rain, who's the real political scientist in our crew. I got out of the undergrad and carried on into education. But she is currently with a group of students in New York, working on Model UN, but she wishes she could be here. So she sends her regrets. I am the director of Not Learning From Beyond, although that is an interesting title. Maybe some seances and stuff, I don't know. Learning and Beyond, which does all of our off-campus experiential learning, and I share much of the ambivalence. So we work not only in international contexts, which I'll be speaking about here today, but also service learning in higher education, and I'm constantly conflicted about what I'm doing. Yeah, but anyway, so is that good? Bad? I don't know. Yeah. But anyways. And I'm also part of that evil administration of the university. I go to more meetings than I get to teach. Anyway, so you may all want to throw tomatoes at me shortly. Carry on. I also am an assistant professor of global development studies. And so it's in that context that I work on this Santiago de Cuba program, which sends students for a semester to Santiago de Cuba, on the so-called eastern side of Cuba, for about 3.5 months. And I've worked in this kind of international education context since ~94, both in the university context and in the non-governmental organization context, Canada for Youth, in both Mexico and Cuba, and dalliance in Western Africa. And I've also done my graduate work here at Boise UT, so it's nice to be back amongst friends here, rather than out in Alberta, which is where I'm hanging my hat right now, the Texas of, yes, anyways, of Canada. We are in the Camrose campus, however. We are so different there. The most conservative riding in the country. Sorry about that. Yes, it's just something to, lay claim to, yes. But we're an hour southeast of Edmonton, for those of you who don't know, and our focus is liberal arts undergraduate education. So that's some context that's relevant. Quickly, I am going to give a quick overview of our program, do a little bit of exploration of theory. I hear you're supposed to do that at these things, I don't know. And then talk about some of the possibilities and limitations of our program. We have two key arguments that will be so perfect once we get this into the final written form, but currently something like our program provides a significantly different discursive and material space for undergraduate university students to ask different questions about alternative social organization. And secondly, that place-based learning cannot be assumed to negate neoliberal marketized education, but can still be deployed in subversive ways, opening a critical space to think differently. So how many people here have experience in Cuba? Just curious, either like something other than a resort? Okay. Excellent. Just to know who I am speaking to. And maybe I should preface my comments. I'm very supportive of what's going on in Cuba. That doesn't mean I don't also have questions. And so, but don't want any of this to come across as negative in any way against sort of many of the ideals of the revolution. So the overview of our program, I could spend the rest of my time trying to explain all the intricacies of, font sizes and stuff that make up our assignments. They don't actually. But I will have to be brief as I'm discussing the overview of the program, so that I can actually say some of the other stuff I want to say. So as I mentioned, it's a semester abroad in Cuba. It started in 1998. We did one outing in Havana, and now we are deliberately based in Santiago. So theoretically the second largest city in Cuba, birthplace of many of the revolutionary moments and movements in Cuba, the Granma, the sort of the final triumph. The revolution landed quite close by, and Santiago is just this steeped in history of revolution. But at the same time as all of this is true, it's also really the periphery, actually, to the the Havana Santa Clara core, or Veradero. So, I mean, it's big. It's definitely not the other periphery. I hung out in Ciego de Ávila in a rural community of 4,000. That's really far out. But it is sort of the forgotten in some ways, in part because of its distance depending on how you drive, it can take you 12, 14 hours to get from Havana to there. Students our program is a partnership with Universidad de Oriente, one of multiple universities in Santiago, and our program consists of 6 of our 15 credits in language instruction. So if you're going to hang out in a place, you probably should at least make some attempts at learning the language. Students are more or less successful. And just in case you're wondering, just drinking rum doesn't actually also teach you how to speak Spanish. In case you had harbored that similar sentiment to our students. There are a series of other courses that students can take in history, Cuban history, Cuban politics. We have a sociology course, which is really gender in a Cuban context. We have a wraparound course that is an interdisciplinary studies course that we teach, sort of helps students make sense of all the other experiences that they're having there. And with the courses that are taught by our colleagues at Oriente, they're taught in translation. So they're taught in Spanish, and then students in the English language program actually do simultaneous interpretation translation. And so it's a practicum for them, but those students are also an excellent peer group for our students to connect with and get a different view into what is going on in Cuba. Our students stay in casa particulares, so similar to bed and breakfasts in around a certain neighborhood in Santiago. So that gives them another view into what another family thinks about Cuba. But these are certainly also a privileged group within Cuba. These are folks that have access to the tourist economy, tourist dollars, and so certainly, that's a part of the thing that we explore with our students. Another element of the program, we put our students into research groups, something we piloted for the first time last year, our last outing. But I've done this kind of thing lots of times with the programs I've run in Mexico. And basically students are doing community-based research, and some of the questions they're asking, what is local knowledge? What do we do when local knowledge contradicts all these lovely books we've read, the expert knowledge? Sort of cognitive dissonance, but as a way of trying to work our way through that. And then what's the role of language? Some of our students actually come up with this wonderful research protocol and then everything written in English. And then they're shocked when they go out to the community and all of a sudden, even though they have a translator there or they think they can get it out or Google Translate told them how to say this, oh my goodness, I can't actually get this, or there's all this other colloquial stuff that I'm not understanding, and so mediating fluent language. We also have our students doing reflective work using a tool, video podcasts, short videos that they put together. We don't give them any technical training on how to put together a video, but use that as a different form, so you're not just stuck writing in your journal, but a different mode of doing a reflection. So some of the students will reflect on what does it mean to be a woman in a machista culture. This is just hugely a huge impact for the female students that participate, but also for the men. What are some of the other cultural differences that we see? And they do those reflections in a short videos that submit to us. They've also done sort of their research groups have also done longer videos on stuff like the informal economy, or the so-called black market. How does that work? Fascinating how can you actually go and ask people, what do you think of this? And the responses are often, I'm not going to talk to you about that on the video, which makes sense. But great learning, why not? What's youth's perception of education? So in Cuba, we all like to use Cuba as the example of this amazing educational system, yet the students that, their peers that our students are interacting with are really questioning, what am I going to school for? When really what I should do is learn English, or maybe if I want a real niche market, French or German or something, Italian, and work in the tourist industry. That's going to get me way more than being a doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever. So they did some videos around that. Around tourism. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur, a small business owner in Cuba, which is something that's being really promoted right now. So what are the experiences of the individuals in that? And we're also introducing community service learning, so it's all there. Which is interesting in a Cuban context, because what is a nonprofit? What is civil society in Cuba. So that makes for some fun questions that students ask. Theoretically, we want to ground this mostly in place-based learning. I mean, it's grounded in critical pedagogy, and I could draw sort of pedagogical lineage from Gramsci, Freire, Hooks, challenging the banking model of education, all that. I'll leave that to others, but that does sort of underpin the work that we do. But I don't feel I have anything unique to say about that at this point. But in terms of Che and pedagogy, it is in our title, to draw your attention to the works of Peter McLaren, who has a book out on this, as well as John Holst, who talks about a critical pedagogy of Che. So there are people in Holst's case doing sort of almost an exegesis of all of Che's work, writing, and some of the biographies written about him, and looking at, even though he doesn't want to be called a teacher, what is his pedagogy? What is his approach? But again, I think there's certainly some harmony there between that pedagogy and the work we do, but we're not explicitly drawing on that. So the sort of theoretical framing that I want to draw our attention to perhaps is the potential, at least, of place-based learning as a frame for understanding our work. David Greenwood and Smith and others are using this as a framework, which tries to bring together the at times competing strands of environmental education and critical pedagogy, seemingly both the social and the environmental. Again, nothing overly radical new, but I think it's an interesting way of framing how we think about our work, and perhaps something useful for us to think about together. And I mean, one may ask, particularly in the context of study abroad, why do you even need to foreground place? But my research on the literature and experience with other programs is that even in study abroad, often local place is almost ignored, ironically, right? So you go to, my sister did this, she went to Guatemala, a great program, she learned lots, but she went and studied micro and macroeconomic theory in Guatemala. And so yeah, there was a few examples, maybe it was taught in Spanish, I can't remember, but really, that's universal, or maybe it shouldn't be, but anyways, a whole series of other issues. But Guatemala isn't actually part of what they're talking about. And so really wanting to say it's important to foreground and include the local space, the local place as much as possible, so that our students can learn to live well, ecologically and socially in place. I mean, this is a study of contradictions in many ways. There's a huge contradiction in study abroad. I mean, to what extent are we actually resisting sort of some of the neo-colonial impulses of some of the study abroad, right? That we're going to go develop these poor people or whatever stuff goes on in people's minds, or we're going to help. All kinds of problematic stuff. But I still, in spite of so the way I make peace with it is, this is where students are at. This is where they want to go. The learners, they may be wrong, but in my exalted theoretical way of looking at things, this is where they are. So let's see if we can use this for good. So I mean, our experience, our program doesn't live outside of the neoliberal marketized university, nor does our Cuban partner university. There's increasing pressure for revenue streams, and our program is a big source of revenue for the people that are involved with us. And so it's really hard for us to make sure we don't fall into the trap of just this contractual relationship. But it's certainly something that's true. Another piece that I've heard bubbling up at different places is the role of student resistance. So, I mean, we think there's lots of potential here, but students are often resisting these new ways of thinking where basically there isn't, what's the right answer? Well, there isn't a right answer. What do you think about Cuba? I don't know what I think about Cuba. What do you think about Cuba? And there's a lot of resistance to that. Or the final exam in Spanish sometimes involves skits. What do you mean I can't write, an exam on this? Tell me what's the right answer? Communicate in Spanish, please. And so, needing to find ways to work with that student resistance in a respectful way, meeting the learner where they're at. And maybe a final piece to speak about is that place does matter. So one of the things that's unique to our Cuban context, and I think that's different than here, is the extent to which contradictions are evident, and the kind of contradictions of capitalism and whatever that are evident in a context like Cuba, in ways that they may not be as evident here. For example, I mean, in absolute terms, disparity in Cuba is certainly less than income disparity than in many other parts of the world. But there is still a disparity, and a growing disparity, between those who have access to the tourist market and those who don't. So what do you do about that? And the point isn't to come to answers, but to have our students thinking through that. Or the point I made earlier about the education system and the ways in which many students are now questioning the value of this amazing education system, and should we even pursue that? But really is eye-opening for our students to think about that. And I think looking at these contradictions really opens students' eyes to seeing similar kinds of contradictions back home, and realizing, we live in Alberta, tar sands, there might be a few contradictions there. Or our university, the oil sands, the COSI was the acronym from this morning, right? I mean, that's right in our institution. So it opens their eyes to those kind of things. So I think in those ways, that's how there's at least potential for students as agent students to explore their own agency, explore their own learning, that there is some revolutionary or subversive potential in what we do. Not guaranteed, but I think there is at least some potential for our students to do that. And to challenge sort of conventional wisdom, or conventional or common sense understanding of expert and knower, knowing, learner, teacher. When you sort of have the community or the country or the city of Santiago as your teacher.